everybody. My name is Daniel J. Garza, and I am host of Putting Together Conversations. Thank you for joining us. Today, I am excited to start a new conversation, something that has not been part of the Put It Together catalog, dialogue, however you want to look at it, transgender in America. And I am very excited to have three very influential people in the community joining me today. I want to start first with Miliana Singh. She is the LGBT Healthcare and Transgender Services Coordinator for the Center. She's a California transplant moving from Florida, but she's no stranger to Orange County, and she moved from Orange County, Florida. She's passionate about uplifting and empowering the community through outreach and building a strong sense of unity. Miliana started her transition in Polk County, Florida in 2006, in a region that was not gender affirming and that lacked the resources for a successful transition. Despite her obstacles, she was able to become the woman she is today. She uses the past as a reminder of what hardships was like and fuels that into the passion that now has to better the lives of those she's able to affect. Miliana started at the center as a volunteer and within a year transitioned into an employee for the center. And she's excited for the positive changes to come. Miliana, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you so much. I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me on here. I'm excited to talk with you today.
Thank you. I being at the LGBT Center in Orange County, I feel like we've crossed paths, me being part of the Orange County, California HIV community. There's this overlapping. I feel like we've met in person. And for everybody watching, we are reporting this still on lockdown. So that's why you see us on Zoom. Otherwise, I would want to have them in person. But tell us a little bit more about what you do at the center and a little bit more about your story.
Yeah, so your face looks super familiar. So I'm like, I know I'm always crossing paths with folks. I work directly with Tony Viramontes, who is the prevention director of preventative services. And so Tony oversees the HIV and STI testing. So we might have met somewhere along the lines. And so my scope of work is I oversee the LGBTQ healthcare program, and that entails finding providers who are LGBT affirming and inclusive and competent, of course, and getting them connected to the clients. And so clients reach out to me looking for providers. They may need assistance with insurance, getting on insurance, how to navigate their insurance, starting transition, or they might be looking for fertility or kind of anything under the sun. I'm their go-to person. So I oversee that program, and I also oversee the Trans Services program. And with Trans Services, we have some things in place such as orientation, which is like a very educational and informative presentation that we put on for the community. And we explain what transitioning looks like from a mental health aspect, medical, how to navigate your insurance. We talk about immigration. We also talk about the next steps after you change your name and gender marker change. And with that, we also do a free legal clinic that we hold 9 months out of the year in conjunction with UCI Law. And that is a free clinic for folks to come and change their gender marker, their name, and we assist them with any legal questions that they may have. And the medical part within the orientation is done with UCI Gender Diversity Program. So we've done some great stuff. And a little fun fact, one of the panelists today actually helps to start the Transitions Health and Wellness program at the center that I now work under, but I'm gonna let them speak soon.
Before I move on, you started your transition in 2006. From 2006 to now, what are some of the changes that you've seen in the community that maybe makes it easier for people to transition or begin their transition?
Yeah, so, I don't know what the world was like outside of my bubble in 2006, but I definitely know it was a different time. What I see in the media, what is even, I know the Walmart prescription plan, that being put in place for the $4 and $8 prescriptions and things like that. So in 2006, it was a totally different world where we didn't have healthcare protections within the state of Florida. I'm not even sure before I left if there was healthcare protections for trans folks, or there definitely wasn't employment protection for trans folks back in 2006. And, I lived in Polk County, so they didn't know what trans was. We didn't have an LGBTQ center, community, and life was totally different. I kind of started my transition through the Black market. I self-medicated for the first 4 years of my transition. And so, the doctors knew I was self-medicating, but no one stepped in to intervene. And they just felt like, okay, we're just going to kind of turn a blind eye to that. I feel now, we've made a big shift over the years. I was just watching the Disclosure film on Netflix last night, and I implore everyone to watch it if you haven't. But it explores, the lens of trans folks through media and through cinema. And I definitely remember in 2006 how different it was to kind of navigate the world, not seeing proper representation, even terminology. They used transsexual, and they said gender identity disorder. And there was a lot more barriers to accessing adequate healthcare.
Got it. So before I come to you to start the conversation, let me introduce the other panelists. Second is, what can I say? Drew is one of my favorite people. I had the pleasure of interviewing Drew when he was co-author of a book, and he was a guest on my podcast show, and we just had a blast chatting. He just became one of my favorite people. So when I decided to want to do this interview, he was obviously the first person that I went to. Drew, who transitioned in 2012, while in his late 30s, is an entrepreneur, public speaker, and a fierce lover of the human connection. From 2016 to 2018, Drew traveled cross country in a Winnebago RV with his dog Ralphie, and launched his writing career by co-authoring the book Positive Minded People. Most recently, Drew returned to Seattle to further the success of his prominent dog walking and pet sitting company, which he has owned for the last 12 years. Having experienced success both personally and professionally, Drew is a testament to living an authentic life and finds his greatest joy in empowering others along their path. Hi, Drew. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
And for those of you,
to be here.
Thank you. For those of you that have possibly heard me mention him in podcasts and in some of my other shows, this is Winnebago Drew. So
True. I wish I was down there. We could go to lunch and
oh my God,
just walk around together.
So how are you? And please introduce yourself to the audience.
I'm great. I'm doing well. I'm honored to be here with the three of you. I've actually met all of you in person, which is also an honor. How do I go after Miliana? I mean, everything you've done, I'm so grateful that you were in that role and that you're doing what you're doing. Because listening to you talk about the legal help and the orientation that's there to educate folks, but it sounds like you also do things like how to help people that are in their transition. And thank you, because I didn't have that, and so thank you for what you're doing. So where am I? I transitioned, like you said, and started in about 2011, and I'm now up here in Seattle, which is a very liberal state, and it's a safe place to be. When I was traveling in the RV, I did travel with my grandma some of the times through small towns and parts of the country that I was scared to be in, to be honest with you. And here's what's really interesting. I transitioned in my late 30s, like I said, and when I started passing as male, cis male, so like you look at me and people may not know I'm transgender, the world changed for me. I remember specifically, I started growing my beard and stuff. I was in Southern California, and I walked into a store, and the person stopped and said, "Sir, can I help you?" And I was like, who are they talking to? People started treating me different. It was eerie. So I'm going to go off on a little tangent. But basically, I've now walked in the world of a white male, a white privileged male, and I've reaped so many benefits from it. So many. I used to get stared at when I was, a butch female, more masculine looking female. I'm short. I'm 5'2", so, I'm little, but I got stared at all the time. It was just something I got used to.
Interesting.
And when I started passing, which means, people just didn't know I was transgender, people quit staring at me. And I realized when I was in Southern California at the time with my fiance and family, that I could just live. No one was concerned with who I was or how I was living. I could just live my life.
Right.
And I hadn't felt that as an adult.
That's
It was
interesting.
very interesting. And then I realized that's great and all, but you have to do more. So I'm in the steps now of wanting to do more and support, and where do I go from here to make a positive impact? Daniel, thank you for reminding me. So that's my story briefly.
And I want to come back and touch on that, because that is that's something that I hadn't considered from where I'm standing, like the difference that the visual perception makes in a person. So we're going to come back to that.
Okay.
Doctor, how you doing, doctor? So doctor, please pronounce your last name for me, because I should have asked you this in pre-production and I did not, and I don't want to butcher it.
Vierregger. It's a lot easier to say than it looks. There's
okay.
way too many letters in it. It's Vierregger, but please call me Dr. V. Make it a lot easier.
Dr. V, excellent. That's how I saw your name on different places. I'm like, I hope she lets me say Dr. V, because it'll make it a lot.
For good reason.
Yes, because my Spanish kicks in and it makes it really hard to pronounce words sometimes.
Oh, Vierregger. Yeah, you're scared of German too. It's scary.
So Dr. Kristen V received her medical degree from the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine and completed the residency at UC Irvine. She specializes in hormone therapy for transgender patients at her clinic, Metamorphosis Medical Center in Orange County, California, where she has helped over 1,000 trans and non-binary patients. She has worked closely with the OC LGBT Center's Transition Health and Wellness Program and received their Torchbearer Award for her work and dedication to improve access to care for the OC transgender patient population and beyond. That's very impressive and very cool. So introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It's a privilege and honor for me to be here among these, also my favorite human beings in the world. I think these folks have that impact on us. And as you were reading my bio, I got tears in my eyes because 5 years ago, I had opened my practice mostly treating cisgender patients. And I realize most of your audience might not understand the terminology, so let me take a minute. Cisgender, and I identify as a cisgender lesbian, means that I identify as female and I am female-bodied. And trans means that the gender identity that one knows themselves to be does not align or match the body or the sex that they were assigned at birth. And if you could forgive my dogs in the background, hopefully they'll settle down in a second, or we could cut this part out.
They're cheering you on.
It's
like,
the beauty.
yes!
Yeah. This is the beauty.
Oh, we love Zoom meetings, don't we?
I think they're so much more raw and authentic than when we have a studio to record in. So continue. Let the dogs bark.
So cis and trans really are speaking to one's gender identity. And Drew approached me about 6 years ago now. It's 2014. And are you okay if I share this story, Drew?
Please share every piece of it, but okay. I'm going to cry.
I got really emotional, and I noticed you did too in that moment. But and the reason for that is, so I was working mostly with cisgender folks, balancing their hormones through menopause and andropause. And Drew was a friend of a friend, and he learned that I did hormones. And so he approached me, and I can only imagine how hard that conversation was to initiate. But basically, as I remember, it was like, so you do hormones, and can you help me? And he talked about his story of having recently moved to Southern California. He had begun transitioning out of state 3 years prior, and he was running out of testosterone and could not find a doctor in Southern California to refill his testosterone, not make the diagnosis of gender dysphoria or the appropriateness of initiating hormone therapy, but just needing a refill. And hormones are life for all of us, but sustaining an appropriate level of hormones is especially important for trans folks. And so, if I'm in a bit of desperation, he was asking me to help him. And I had never worked with trans folks before. Clinically, I'd met a few, and as they had been generous with their stories in my situations, I had this thought, dang, the transitioning journey is hard. And at that time, I was not in a position to really help in meaningful ways, but the thought was planted in the back of my mind, like, if there's ever a way that I could make life a little bit easier for these folks, I really hope that I could have that opportunity. And so here, Drew and I were having this conversation, and I was very honest. I said, listen, I have not been trained. That's a fault of our medical education in trans care. But I know that knowledge exists. I am not unfamiliar with hormones, so this is a very close step. And if you're okay with me with that, I will do my homework. And I will become the best provider that I can be, not only for you, but for anyone else who's experiencing similar difficulties, and provide you that compassionate, competent, quality healthcare that you're having such a hard time finding. And as Drew was sharing his story and what a difficult time he was having like all but the phone hung up on him when he was asking for care, I started getting really angry at my colleagues. And I started thinking, why doesn't somebody do something about this? And as the universe often does, tap, tap on the shoulders. It's like, yes, that's why we're having a conversation. Why don't you try to be the change you want to see in the world? Why don't you at least help this dear soul? And he looked at me toward the end of that conversation, and he's like, are you ready? Are you ready for this? And I did not know what I was saying yes to, but I know it was momentous. We have moments in lives where we make important decisions. We're presented with opportunities. And I said, I don't know what I'm saying yes to, but yes, I'm ready for it all. And 1,000 patients later, Drew.
Wow.
1,000 patients later, we've been able to help a lot. So I credit Drew for centering me in my calling. My gratitude is incredibly deep, and I'm just honored every day to work with these magnificent humans and hear their stories and be able to provide meaningful help to them.
Wow, that's interesting enough. This morning I was just on another platform talking about tornadoes and storms, that there's the beginning, that we're not prepared, we don't know what's going to happen, what's coming. Then there's the eye of the storm, where we pause and we reflect on where we're going to go, and then it's the end of the storm, and you just don't know what's going to happen and the consequences. And obviously the consequences of this thunderstorm, this tornado, was this, and I'm sure all your patients are so grateful that you were there to ride the storm with them. And it's doctors like you that make people like me want to share these stories. So thank you. Little do we know, for everybody out there, little do you know from reading a bio exactly what a person's story is. So please stick around for the rest of the show so you can learn more about them. So just so that everybody is on the same foundation, so we have the same platform. Miliana, can you explain to us, and I'll say this for me too, in the most dummy down way possible, what is transgender? What is the truth and what is not the truth, so that everybody watching and myself can understand the basics?
Yeah, so I guess to put it in layman terms, trans means opposite. And so cis means the same. So you, identify as male, you were born male, or you identify as masculine, so you'd be classified as cisgender. Dr.V is cisgender. I'm trans, which means I was born male. However, I never identified as male. And so I went through a transition to align my gender with my identity, or to have my identity and gender be congruent. And for Drew, it was a similar journey. And so, you know, Drew and I are trans, meaning that the sex assigned to us at birth is not the gender that we inherently felt. And being trans, there's not one cookie cutter way of doing it. I mean, you see two trans folks here, one trans femme, one trans masculine, but it's different for everyone. There are folks within the binary who identify as a trans woman or a trans man, and then there's other folks who are gender non-binary, gender non-conforming, who don't care to adhere to the binary of being man, woman, male, female.
So trans doesn't necessarily mean you want to automatically identify as the opposite sex.
Right. It just means that the sex assigned to you at birth does not match your gender identity, how you identify yourself.
So for everybody watching, I also want to disclaimer that although I do have some understanding during the conversation, I will play devil's advocate just to make sure that you listening understand what we're talking about and that you walk away with a better understanding. This is in no way for me to disrespect my guest or to judge them or make my own assumptions. This is to clarify so that every myth that you possibly have in your head will be squashed and we can walk away with a better understanding. I want to make sure that you understand that so that you don't write me and say, why were you being so disrespectful and mean? I am not. I just want you to know what the truth is and what not the truth is. So with that said, there's a lot of, and I understand this from people that I speak to, because of the popular culture, for instance, and I'll bring up RuPaul's drag show. A lot of people misconstrued drag with trans, and that is not the same thing, correct?
No, it's not the same. So I wouldn't even say drag is within the trans umbrella, but I remember growing up reading encyclopedias because I studied this as early as I can remember. But I remember seeing the encyclopedia definitions for, you know, TV, TS, TG, transgender. There was a term back in the day called transsexual, transvestite, so on and so forth. But drag has always been something of its own entity. Drag or female impersonation or impersonators are folks who get dressed up for the art of it. They love to, you know, most of them are either impersonating like a person, celebrity, or they're very like whimsical, over the top, very fantasy, and it is to earn money. It is a way to express themselves. Drag, at the end of the day, they take it off. You may see them in that appearance, in that presentation for work, or you may know them for being that way, but when they go to sleep at night, everything is off. The hair, the makeup, the extra parts that they put on, everything is removed, and they go to bed as their selves prior to, you know, getting into drag. And yeah, and so there are trans people who do drag. It's not exclusive to just cis folks, but drag is not synonymous for trans.
And Drew, why is it important? And again, for everybody watching, I've heard people say, well, if you are transitioning to be a man, why is it important to say trans man? Or is it important?
Everybody's different, so everybody's going to describe or talk about themselves the way they want to. For me, for me, when I was just passing, or just people just said, oh, you know, that's that white dude, Drew. You know, I could have, so I named myself Julian Drew Bensen. Drew's my middle name, because when I was transitioning, I wasn't sure if I was going to want to hide and be because people, I mean, let's be real. There are people in this world that want to kill me because they don't agree with me, like it's their business. So I wasn't sure if I wanted to just go quietly on with my life and not just disclose that I'm transgender. And that's perfectly okay for anybody that's doing that or wants to do that. For me, when I was living that life, I realized something's not right. You have a soul purpose and you're not reaching it. It's perfectly okay for you to do this if you choose, but you have a bigger life to live, a different life to live. And you know, you have to step into it. That's the kind of conversation I have with myself. And so, when I wrote that small chapter of that book that, you know, 10 people bought, I knew that my story would be out to the world for the rest of ever on the internet or wherever. And so I knew that I was coming out to the world. And here's why I did it. I remember distinctly, I was in like Santa Fe, New Mexico, sitting in my RV, and I read a story about a 12-year-old child who killed themselves because they knew they were transgender and they were bullied, like, you know, for whatever reason they did. A 12-year-old child. And I said, you can't be afraid anymore. You have to stand up. And if the kids knew that so I had no idea how this was going to look when I was transitioning. I had no idea if people were going to tell me I don't love you anymore, if people were going to hurt me, if I could do it, if I had the strength to do it. And I'm a pretty strong person, and I didn't know if I had the courage. So I knew in that moment when I saw another death, another suicide, and there's also murders, you know, not to be dark, but this is real. I knew you can't just sit here in your nice little male white privileged, you know, RV that the guy you bought it from said, I always help the dudes. And he threw racial slurs in, the worst racial slurs you can say. He doesn't do that anymore. Don't worry. I knew you can't just sit back and enjoy sit on your pile of gold. Not that I'm on a pile of gold, and just go on with your life and let that happen. You have to stand up. And so that is why I came out and tell people I'm transgender. I'm a trans man not because I'm just me, right? But I say that part so that people know, and I expose more people to people like me. When I traveled in that RV and I went to these little towns and these little RV parks, and this isn't to pick on anyone, this is really what happened. You know, my story came out and some folks knew in this big like event I was at, and verbatim I got said to me, hey, can we talk? You know, I'm really, really Christian. No, like I'm really Christian. Okay. And you're a nice person. Now, this isn't to judge any religion. This is what was said to me. And I'm thinking, what is the comparison here? If you're really, really Christian, you're not supposed to love, like you're supposed to be not think I'm more like a human. Like, right. What do you mean? But I listened and said, oh, you know, well, thank you for noticing, or, you know, listen to them cry and talk about how they, you know, were changed. So I all of a sudden was given a seat at the table, and I heard a quote, or I read a quote from Gabrielle Union that said, oh, something about having a seat at the table, explicit that table, F that table. Like, but because I would say that now, I'm going to really think about that. Like, what table are we talking about here? But I have a voice. People listen, they hear me, and like maybe I don't know why, Daniel. I don't know why, but some folks hear it coming out of my mouth differently. Let's wrap our brain around that. And so if I just sit back and let those things happen, it's against my soul,
right?
And I can't do it. That's why. I know that's deep, but that's why.
Yeah, well, because I'm thinking, as I'm listening to people speak, I would think, I know this is going to sound very simplistic, but it's the packaging that changed, not the soul or the spirit, correct? Um, for instance, I'm going to say your name wrong, but I don't want to say your name wrong. Miliana, were you always? Because you just said this is me. Were you always just you waiting to come out?
For me, yeah. I had a conversation with my aunt, who is 5 years older than me. We were raised like cousins, and we were playing house when I was 3 years old. And she told me when I was 18, I had already started my transition. When we were playing house at that time, she was 8 and I was 3. I told her I was a girl. So I always had this feeling. As early as I can remember, I've never had a moment where I felt male or like a boy. I knew I was a boy only because people would kind of groom me into maleness, into male activity, attire. People would misgender me as female, and my parents would tell them, no, this is a boy. But for me, it was very affirming for people to see me as a girl because they saw me, they saw the real me. And I was lucky enough to be androgynous up until puberty. And I had a feminine face, and I had a feminine voice. I was short. I was always like probably the third shortest kid. Once to like the first or third shortest. I was, I think, 5 foot pretty much up until puberty hit. So I had it pretty good. Like I had feminine features, a small, delicate body, and I think when puberty hit, it was like that realization of, okay, this is not right. I know what female puberty is. I know what girls go through, and I'm not going through that. Like, where's my menses? Where is my chest? Why is my voice getting deeper? Why are my hands getting bigger? Why am I seeing a man in the mirror?
That's something that even as a gay man, as you mentioned in the beginning, I've always been a man. I've always enjoyed being a man. I always identified as a man. So I there was never that for me. Like, so it's eye-opening that you would grow up and go, who is that in the mirror looking back at me? And that's really, for everybody listening and watching, look at yourself in the mirror right now. And were you ever comfortable? Were you always comfortable in your skin? And who was looking back at you in the mirror? And if you weren't, why not? Before I continue, because I know there's some really important things that happen in the country, but I want to go to the doctor for a second. Dr. V, we're hearing the physical changes. We're hearing about, okay, this is not my body. I need to change it. But is there pain involved? What is the psychological changes? And also, I don't know if we ever hear from the doctor. How does it impact you to watch one of your patients go through this metamorphosis, go from this caterpillar to this butterfly? And how does it impact you? I know it's a lot of questions, so break it down.
It is, and if I may ask you to repeat a few of those, but the short answer to the last question is I have the best job in the world. My patients entrust me with these stories. I get to facilitate their becoming. And if we think about who we admire in the world and who inspires us, it's usually those people who are living their most authentic, truest lives. Those who have broken the bonds of expectations and conditioning to really live in fullness their truth and the gifts that they were born with. And that is the transitioning journey, is this journey of becoming their most authentic self, the name Metamorphosis came to me long before I met Drew. It was almost like it was in the stars that this was be part of my path and destiny. And Miliana spoke a little bit just there about the pain that's involved in untreated dysphoria. So the medical diagnosis of this is called gender dysphoria. And if you'll indulge me a minute, I'm going to offer an explanation for that made sense for me, not only as a cis person, to help understand the experience of dysphoria. That is not anything that I will have a frame of reference for in my body. And it comes from a psychologist, S.J. Langer, brilliant theorist, and he was asking the big questions like, how do we know gender? How do we do gender? What is gender? The big kind of meta questions. And I'm going to oversimplify his explanation and would invite a discussion with him maybe at some point for further elaboration. But as I understand it, our sense of gender resides in this deep pre-verbal space in our knowing. Fundamental, foundational, a priori knowing, right around the same space where we know that we're human. So how do I know that I'm human? That is not a question I ask myself. I just am. How do I know I'm female? Same thing. How do Miliana and I know that we're female? We just do. That is not something we question. That is a knowing. And I point to here because this tends to be my space of knowing. I change my mind all the time. But my consciousness certainly informs my mind and sets an expectation. So I know myself to be female, and our bodies are forever sending gendered signals, whether it's through hormones, through the senses. The body is forever and incessantly sending gendered signals. So the difference then is that my body sends all these messages to my brain that my body is female. My brain is like, yep, we are, carry on. Prior to transitioning, if the body is sending all of these messages, say that the body is female, and in Drew's experience, he knows himself to be male, bam, it hits this incongruence. And I'll tell you what, if your listeners want to just take a little mental exercise and try to imagine what it's like to have this knowing of yourself when in incessant messaging is contrary to that knowing, I get about 30 seconds into just imagining what that's like before I'm like, that hurts. That discrepancy, that misalignment is painful. And so what I think also is unfair in the trans and non-binary experience is that kids generally, because we are aware of that our bodies have a gender right around 2 or 3. By the time we're 4 or 5, our gender identity is fixed, usually for life. That knowing is we come to terms with that. Pre-puberty, kind of androgynous, as Miliana was saying. We can be tomboys or we can have a little bit more fluidity until puberty hits. And then those secondary sex characteristics come in. And Miliana, you described it, like where are my breasts and what is happening here, and why is my body not going in the same direction, say, as my friends, girlfriends, boyfriends, depending on your identity. So puberty is a critical time. It's hard enough to be a teenager, let's face it. But for one that also probably at this point doesn't have the language to really understand what's going on in their bodies, why do they feel uncomfortable? I've literally had patients Google, why do I feel like a boy in a girl's body? These are big, big questions. And then there is some, usually, whether it's a video or a Google search or hopefully maybe seeing a video like this, they'll be like, hey, I'm not alone in this world. Not only am I not alone, others have experienced this throughout cultures and throughout time. And not only am I not alone, but there's something that can be done about it. And through the advances of modern medicine, yes, we can now provide hormone therapy and any other, for those who wish to medically transition. And then for some, that might also include surgeries, not always, but for those who wish to medically transition, that's an important first step. And what we do in that is start sending aligned messages. And the relief is almost instant. And the not having to have all that static kind of energy consumed with the discrepancy. There's an alignment that from the inside out, they've never felt better in their bodies. And the conflict that was all internal then becomes external. What does this mean for my work? What does this mean for my relationships? If I tell my parents, are they going to kick me out? Then the pain becomes, how is society going to treat me as a trans person? And then that's where some of these some of these recent things, whether it's a Supreme Court or Rule 157 rulings, that's where.
And we're about to go into that part, but before we move on, Again, for everybody watching, please, I'm trying to make this so that everybody understands. If a parent is watching this and they're watching their child, is there a way of knowing that your child is in that position where they don't identify with their body?
They'll tell you. They'll tell you. And really for parents, just follow their lead. Really just listen, attune, follow the kids lead. They'll tell you. And whether it's how they would like to wear their hair, what clothes that they feel most comfortable in, what pronouns they would like, not only family members, but then we get into school and social settings, really affirming the child's expressions of gender and providing support as needed and as appropriate, depending on their development and their age.
And then my next question, not everybody is seeking the surgery, correct?
100%. And I'm really glad that you brought that up, because there tends to be a real fixation on what's going on downstairs, which is, by the way, none of anybody's business. And a very, very small proportion of trans folks end up getting surgeries, like on the order of maybe 5%, depending on what we're talking about. So, and that may be because of inequalities in access to care, and there are a lot of reasons why that number may be lower than it otherwise folks might desire. But, right, can we just do away with the fixation about, like, what do you got going on down there? Ain't none of your business.
And then before I move into what we're talking about happening in the country now, everybody's transition story is different as far as time, process, medications.
100%. There is no trans narrative. There is no one way to do this. And this, I do come up with a lot. There can be if someone's fought really hard to become who they are and they've had to overcome certain things, then there can be a way, like, if you didn't do it my way, then you're not doing trans right. And, and there, that just needs to be kicked to the curb. Yeah. There is no one way to do this. There's only the individuals moving through this life journey to the very best of their ability.
So basically there's A to B, but there's a lot of pit stops along the way that can change the direction.
As Ralph Waldo Emerson said, the journey of the best ships is one of 1,000 tacks. So it's going to be here to here to here, because ships don't go straight from one point to the next because the wind won't let them. But if they're going on this direction, be like, where are you going? So yeah, many ways.
All right, thank you, Doctor. So now that we got some of the more technical parts of it, now for everybody who's still watching, you have understood what the foundation is of trans, what the basics and not basics are, and what you're allowed to ask and not allowed to ask. And basically, to put it simple, what is none of your business, and just don't ask. So moving forward, we kind of brought up a little bit about what's happening in the country at the moment. Again, for everybody watching, this is being recorded on June 20th, 2020. and there's a lot of big changes happening in the country at the moment. I'll open it up to Miliana or Drew, who wants to go first and lay the foundation for what we're.
Yeah, I'm going to do a quick tidbit, and then I'm going to let Drew have the floor. But for those who have not seen, and if you have access to it, if you don't, go and get it. Netflix, disclosure. That's all I'm going to say. Disclosure. You need to watch it. It just came out. Dr.V, you made some really great points, and they were actually discussing that in the film about how the ship has changed and how incredible it was to see folks like Carmen Carrera and Laverne Cox stand up for themselves, because the narrative and the conversation and the questions used to be all about genitalia, surgeries, body parts, what you did, what you didn't do, and we've had some incredible trailblazers who push to make sure that we talk about the experience and we talk about the real gritty things that happen to trans folks, not just what body parts you have, what surgeries you've done, what makes you a woman. With that being said, I think it's, I'd be remiss not to speak on what is happening with the community, and I'll just drop a couple of things and let Drew have the floor. But unfortunately, the murders of trans women, especially Black trans women, is at an all-time high. And we just lost 2 Black trans women within the last 2 weeks. And unfortunately, a lot of these murders are happening to folks under the age of 35. And so their lives are being taken away too soon. Right now, we're mobilizing around Black Lives Matter, and I think this is a very important time for us, and it's a very crucial moment in time. It's very interesting how, this is 51 years of Stonewall, Marsha P. Johnson, Stormy, along with Sylvia, they kind of pioneered this movement for us so that we have space now, so that we can be openly LGBTQ folks, so that we could have the ability to have a platform. But Black folks are still kind of fallen within the margins, and I think it's very important that, we have this space and we have this moment to really push and fight for equality. But even within the Black Lives Matter movement, there is a bit of an erasure of Black trans folks. And as much as we stand up for, George and Brianna and Ahmaud, there's not as much spoken about for folks like Nina Pop and Tony McDade. And that's another conversation about the erasure of trans folks within the Black community and even within the LGBTQ community. But I definitely want to honor them and hold space for them. And recently, footage released about Lifeline, who was imprisoned in Rikers, who passed away, and the horrible treatment that she was receiving from the guards. And so I think, although we have the ability to go through these transitions, to start our transition, to live our lives, depending on where you are in the world. She was in New York, which is a very open place. That's where the revolution started. But even then, the treatment is still not quite there. So there's still a lot of work to be done. And it's disheartening to still see Black trans lives being taken in 2020 when it's 51 years of Stonewall. But a couple of things to mention. Title VII. So, the Supreme Court has ruled in our favor for LGBTQ protections within the workforce. That's incredible. DACA, amazing. As a first-generation American, I am all here for it. I'm so happy about that. As a Black trans woman who did her transition in the South, who didn't have healthcare protections and didn't have, protections within employment, Title VII, I'm happy about that. But on the same token, like I said, I moved from Orange County, Florida, where Pulse happened. I lived in Orlando. Pulse was the very first gay club I ever went to, where I met my now roommate. We've been friends for 10 years now. And I lost folks at Pulse. You know, it was disheartening that on the anniversary, the 4th anniversary of Pulse, that administration made the decision to revoke healthcare protections for trans folks. And as someone who had to deal with a lot of barriers with access to care, who has to go to the Black market and self-medicate for 4 years of my transition, my fear is, what does that look like for folks outside of the 23 states that don't have some type of protection for trans folks, and folks outside of California? I mean, I live in an amazing state that makes sure that I have adequate health care, but what does that look like for other folks? And then I think, you know, that's something that we need to keep in mind.
Can I ask you, before we move over to Drew, because you brought up different communities within a community, do you, or does it even, I'm not sure how to ask the question, is there a loyalty line? It's like Black Lives Matter, but the trans community is not being protected. How do I move forward? Like, which way? Do you feel like you're in a tug of war as far as where your loyalty lands, or is that even an issue?
Yeah, definitely. You know, there's so many layers and facets and intersectionality. I'm a Black woman, I'm a brown woman, I am, you know, of African descent, I'm of Indian descent, I am of Caribbean lineage, I'm first generation American, and I'm trans. And all of these various communities, you know, like when people see me, they see Black, but I also hold true to my Indian ancestry, because it is just as strong as my African ancestry. So it's like constantly fighting a war of picking a side, of holding true to myself as I am, because I, you know, see myself as a mixed race Black woman, but also the fight. And, you know, there was a beautiful conversation from Isis King and Alexander Billings last night at the LA Trans Pride, the virtual Pride, and they spoke on what it is like to be, oh, so sorry. Okay, am I back?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I was getting a phone call. 1 sec. So they spoke on what it was like to be Black or mixed race.
The magic of Zoom, folks. It happens all the time.
Yeah, I'm like, oh no, I'm getting a phone call. Okay. So yeah, so they spoke on what it's like to be, so Alexander Billings is a mixed race woman, and Isis King is a Black trans woman who, if you have not seen When They See Us, it's also on Netflix. I implore you to please go and watch that film. She did an amazing job playing Marcy, the trans sister of Corey Wise from When They See Us. But she spoke on her reservations as a Black trans woman, wanted to go out there and fight and to march and protest for Black Lives Matter, but being afraid because there's discrimination within that, because there still is an erasure of Black transness and bodies. Just a few weeks ago, there was a viral video that went out of Yana Dior, who was attacked by a mob of and I have to even be careful about the language that I use, because there is a lot of, I guess, like blackfishing within the media and how they portray folks, especially Black folks. But there was a group of about 20 to 30 Black men and women who attacked her. I can imagine being a single person and a group of people just beating me, and this is in Minneapolis. And so that instills the fear in a lot of Black trans folks, especially Black trans women, because a lot of our murders are happening by the hands of Black men and Black cis men and Black men that we've been romantically involved with. And so as much as we want to fight and protest and stand in solidarity with our Black brothers, sisters, and siblings, there's also a fear of what happens when that same fervor is turned around on us.
Because I listened to that particular news story. It made me feel it's like, in my imagination, the way that I could picture is like, here you are protesting in unity of color, and then that same group turns on you as a Latino man, immigrant, because we moved here when I was 3 years old. I sometimes, not in this, and please, for everybody listening, it's just, I have to put this in the context of my understanding. It's like, I can't imagine if I was protesting something that has to do with immigration, and then those two people turn on me because I'm gay. It's like, where does your loyalty stand and how do you defend it? Okay, it's not about my focus. I'm gonna move for me. But from what Miliana is talking about, Drew, how does that impact you? And how?
Well, you just unpacked a lot, and I'm so glad that you kept speaking, because we should listen more and to what you have to say. Okay. I'm also afraid to go out, and I want to protest and be on the side of Black Lives Matter, but I'm afraid to be there because I'm afraid to get arrested. Not that I would do anything wrong. I literally don't even drink anymore. I don't do anything wrong because I have this deep-seated fear of being arrested and being put in a male prison, which that's real. I am not a target anymore. Here's what I mean by that. When I stopped looking female, I became invisible, like I spoke about earlier. And I tried to really understand this and wrap my brain around why. So yes, white male privilege is there because I've experienced it many, many, many times. But why else? Why else am I just kind of like either not seeing it all or just I'm not. I can walk down a dark street. I can walk anywhere. Sure, I could get mugged or something like that, but I can walk anywhere and no one cares. No one even notices me or looks at me.
Interesting.
Yeah. And why I was really thought a lot for many years. Why? Here's my thought on this, because I'm not in that target zone of anything that's. Let me try and articulate this. Female. So, trans woman, cis woman, anybody who's a female that's walked alone in a place that is maybe isolated or dark, I would be shocked to hear that they don't have that spidey sense of danger, be careful. Can you both, are you anybody agree? Yeah, I see your head shaking. So why is that? I think another issue is because of the, how do I say this? So the target of being female. And this is going to sound, I don't know how this is going to sound, but men, not all men, of course, but when a woman is in that target zone, we all do this when we see somebody that we don't know or somebody approaching us. We animal instinct assess who they are. So I see someone coming. I'm like, I personally, I'm attracted to women. So I see someone coming, a woman. I know right away that's a woman. I'm like, I see a man. I know that's a man. And something happens where you just kind of go, not on, no interest, whatever it is. Or you see somebody who's walking towards you that looks like, say, I don't even know how to say that, your animal instinct where there's danger.
Right.
Okay. So, like it's an instinct.
Yes.
We have a conscious and unconscious bias as well, but there's an instinct. So I think what happens with the whole spectrum of women is that you're in this target zone of like men who in general or people who are attracted to women or they see women in this target zone, and you are vulnerable. I don't know if I'm articulating this very well. And for some reason, it's that person's business. Now, this is maybe somebody who's going to target women, of course, but all of us do this. We assess people that are approaching us. So when I no longer became in the target zone, I became invisible. But even though I was a butch female, shaved head, black baggy pants, black shirt, short but tough, I still was, but that's a girl. Wait, is that a girl? Yep, that's a girl, so you're a target. I firsthand have experienced this now for 10 years? So I can say to you, I became invisible when it was instantly, dude, don't care, move aside. And I just became, hey, what's up, or whatever. But when I was female, I was stared at, targeted, and I could feel in the back of my neck, the hairs in the back of my neck, danger.
That's really interesting as I'm watching, because I met Drew through a photo first. And as a gay man, I was like, ooh, he's hot. I want to interview him. Who is this dude? And see, Miliana, I don't see anything but a black woman. And you're gorgeous. And that's my perception. But that's my perception of what I am seeing. Is that still your perception from within? Or I forget the term now, like when somebody loses a limb and they still feel the limb, ghost limbs, I guess it's called. Phantom, thank you. And is there a term for that? Is there a phantom identity that still
Miliana,
exists?
do you mind if I jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
The moment I'm going to talk about me personally, of course, we've laid down the ground rules that we don't ask people about their surgeries, but I'm going to volunteer this piece. When I had top surgery, so when I removed the breast I had, immediately after, I felt like, there you are. I never once have thought back about before. I just set down the bags and moved on. Now I have other things that I, can still assess with, like being disconnected with your body and dysphoria. But for that moment, it just aligned. See, here's the thing. When I was a child, and you spoke to this earlier, Miliana, when I was a child, I knew who I was. I'm me. It's other people that told me, oh, no, you can't take your shirt off. You're not supposed to. Mark can, but you can't. I'm like, why? I've always known who I am, but I wasn't this courageous. I was courageous in other ways. I wasn't this courageous as a kid. I couldn't stand up on my own and say, at 18, I couldn't do what you did, Miliana. I didn't have the courage to stand up and say, this is me. People won't like me. People will hurt me. I didn't have the courage to do it. And I'm not ashamed of that. I didn't. But I've always known who I was. I pushed it down. I focused on other things when I was told I was wrong or I couldn't do it. But I've always known who I was. And that's what's fun. That's interesting about this. It's not about, but if you look at your body, in your brain, like, I know who I am. I know who I am. And then when puberty happened, I was like, what's happening? I felt betrayed up until even in my 30s, where it was like, this is weird. It's uncomfortable. This isn't right. This isn't right. But I've always known who I am. So do I hold on to the past? I let that stuff go because it was killing me. It felt like I was carrying backpacks and backpacks and like those big old style hiking backpacks every day of my life. And this can also be about oppression, right? So like it can relate where other folks are just walking. Sure, they've been through things. They've stubbed their toe. They've had people take them out of, trip them on purpose. They've had things happen, but they're not carrying 300 pounds of backpack on their back like I was. Right? They may have a sprained ankle from that, but they weren't. So I also have that sprained ankle, but I'm carrying 300 pounds of backpack. So I don't think back about missing that backpack.
Got it. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And as you're speaking,
Totally
it makes sense from my perspective, because you were never that. You were imposed this identity that you. And I'll admit, for everybody watching, and most of you know my story, I was outed when I was 17 years old. So I've been out way more than in. So there was such a liberation to, like, okay, I'm gay. can't go back. It's toothpaste that's out. You can't put it back in. And it breaks my heart to know that somebody goes through their life not being able to fully show the world who they are. And then when you finally say, whew, I'm accepting myself, somebody turns around and says, no, you are not accepted. Good for you for finding yourself, but you're not allowed on this side of the room. Go over there. And it's so frustrating because I can sit here and like you were saying, I can walk down the street and be a Latino male with no doubts, and nobody's looking at me and going, oh, I see the gay marking on his forehead. I know what he's up to. But I know that there's not everybody is comfortable in their skin. It's not everybody has gone to a complete process, and they're still shunned and hurt. So I'm going to go to Dr. V right now. For somebody that's out there thinking about, wondering how to even start, what words of encouragement can you give them to start that transition?
First, that they're beautiful as they are. The feelings that they feel inside are real, they're valid. They deserve to be listened to be affirmed, to be supported. And their world may not offer all of that, but that does not mean that they're not worthy of all of that love, support, and assistance in helping them to realize their authentic self. I think that would be the first thing that I would say to them. And then also that they're not alone, that there's a whole community of folks who are a few steps ahead of them in that journey. There are those allies out here that want to help, that do, to borrow Brene Brown's words, see you, we hear you, we value you, and we're here to help. This is an amazing life path, and I can't think of any other that requires this much courage. And out of that, just an extraordinary human being emerges along with their authentic expression. And so there's a lot of hope. It's not an easy path. It is fraught with danger. And I think that both Miliana and Drew have spoken to this, that, well, Drew said it plain out. There are people who want to kill him because he's trans. And I think that's the sadness that you just tapped into, Daniel, with like, holy cow, you just figured out who you were. And now there are others out there that are like, no, you don't get to do that. You don't get to exist in a public space with me. And that's where our call as allies is to help provide that space, stand with arm in arm, stand ahead if we need to, in between threat and their safety, stand behind them when they're taking these amazing steps of courage to share their stories and explain to the rest of us what it means to be trans and share their stories. This is an amazing amount of energy that is required of them, and thank you both for being generous with that energy. But I see the emotional toll that it takes just to be out there with your story, but that when you do, and I'm going to borrow from Brene Brown very liberally, I just heard her interview Laverne Cox about disclosure this morning, so I've got that kind of in my mind. But one of the things that they were talking about was that if you don't own your story, you don't get to write the ending. And if you don't own the story, then the story owns you. And I think I'm going to segue a little bit off of your question, but I think what this moment in history is asking of us, and whether it is regarding racism, our internalized implicit biases, whether it's about misogyny and white supremacy and the patriarchal system, whether it's about how we feel about LGBT folks. As a lesbian, I had to overcome my own internalized homophobia. as a woman, I've had to struggle with being second class. I've had to take the deep dive inside and say, and this came out of a situation where I'd met a man. We had just started a conversation, and through that conversation, he revealed to me that he was trans, and he was very attractive, and I was single at the time, and I walked away thinking, what if there's something here? And that brought me to a very real moment inside my heart that said, what if I fell in love with a trans man? And I struggled with that for a couple of days. And what I realized, I was struggling with my own internalized transphobia. And at the end of that inquiry, I said, you know what? It is what it is. It's a beautiful human being, and that just is what it is. If we don't have some sort of story of overcoming our own internalized transphobia, then that story owns us. If we don't have some sort of story around how we overcome our internalized implicit biases, our racism, our own internalized misogyny, then that story owns us. We still have work to do. And so the deeper dive that we can take with this, considering the courage and generosity of the shared stories, what the invitation here is, hey, that we're just humans trying to avoid suffering, trying to be happy. Can we just all lead with that and lead with love?
Exactly. And part of my mentoring practice is validate, acknowledge, and move forward. And for those of you watching this, we validate your feelings of confusion, whether you are trans or cis or wherever your identity is. We validate that. We acknowledge that you're valuable and that you have a place at the table. And how can we help you move forward? And that's why we're all here having this conversation. How can we help you watching this move forward, whatever your journey is? Now, one thing that I had very present before I started the conversation today was, is there a question that you've never been asked that you'd like to answer now? And I didn't say this in the disclaimer in the video and in the email because I wanted to be a surprise. But there is always something that people don't never ask us. And while you're thinking about it, I'll put it so people often have asked me, it's like, what is my, how do I identify as a gay male and yet still have my Catholic faith? And I always tell them is because I've listened to the message and not the messenger. So although there are people out there who have done some very horrible things, God still loves me and waits for me wherever I am. And I have faith in him and I trust in him. So I believe that God has kept me along almost 50 years for a reason. So I trust in him and I have faith in him. But people never ask me about like how do I identify with both things. And I was gonna tell them, like, I'm still a good Catholic boy. I still have Catholic guilt all the time. So yes. But is there something that you have never been asked that you've always walked away going, I wish they would ask me this?
I got one. I have one.
Okay.
Here's the question I've never been asked. Will you marry me? Yes, Daniel, I will.
You heard it here first.
Winnebago Drew.
Just kidding, Christian.
I already have the cans tied to the string, waiting to put them on that Winnebago.
Gosh, I don't know what question. I usually offer up the answers before people ask the questions. I think I'm gonna have to think about this for a minute. If somebody else has one.
Yeah, that's a hard one for me too. I like to think I'm an open book. So either the question is asked or I probably divulged some information. I'm trying to think. Yeah, it's a tough one.
For those of you watching, I know you're sitting there going, wow, this has been more than an hour. I know, but there's so much more to share, so much to talk. But before we go, I'm gonna leave these folks with that question and maybe they'll get back to me and we'll add it as an annex to the end of the video. Words of wisdom to share with my audience before we leave, whoever wants to start.
Yeah, I would say educate yourself. Like, information and education is power. Be an ally. You know, I feel like there's a lot of talk about, you know, silence and being complicit, but not aligning yourself with this community means that you're pretty much an enemy of ours. And so we need everyone to stand with us. You know, being neutral is siding with oppression. And so now more than ever, we really need folks to stand up, speak out, do what you can. If you can donate, great. If you can donate time, donate money. If you can educate others, please do your part. We all have social media for the most part. We all have smartphones. We can reach out to folks, check in on folks, and we can have a visual of our solidarity and our allyship. So yeah, educate yourself and stand together with us.
Sure, Dr. V.
Dr. V.
Bedra? I guess for trans folks first, parting thoughts. I love you. I am here to support. I see you, hear you, value your experience. There is with you, nothing wrong at all. The trans non-binary experience has been present as long as there have been humans. We have a little bit more awareness now, and there's a growing awareness, but first and foremost, I want you to hear this from a doctor. There is nothing wrong with you. There are certain ways that you might need or want medical support, and I hope that when and if that time comes, well, certainly I would love to have the honor of helping you out, but I also hope that you find a physician, a care team that is there for you to support you in your journey. We're out here for you, and we're ready, willing, and able to help. For my brothers and sisters, please look into your heart. And if, when presented with the thought of befriending or more a trans person or a non-binary person, if your heart resists that thought, lean into it and ask why. Because being uncomfortable is not the same thing as being in danger. If a thought is uncomfortable, that just means there's a little bit of work to do until you see the humanity of the person in front of you and realize, hey, we've got a lot more in common than we have different. And in our differences, we can celebrate those and walk in arm. So I do believe, too, it's time for the G and the L and the B to support the T, because without trans folks, there would be no pride. And there is an epidemic of violence against trans folks, and it's time for the L, the G, and the B to stand up and protect and support and stand with our trans and non-binary brothers and sisters. I
like that last part. I'm gonna quote you on that one.
I don't know what I just said, so I'll have to hear it back.
That's the sign of a true great mind, when they don't know what they've said that inspires other people.
Yeah. Thank you both for sharing all of that. You're both so intelligent, and I just love listening to you talk. For me, a couple things. One is one of the reasons why we had this conversation is because I got provoked a little bit by the ruling that went through, that Miliana spoke of a little bit last Friday, about the taking away transgender healthcare. And it really sparked something within me and lit a fire under me. And so I put a few videos up online, and it because I wanted folks to know that I am going to speak out on this, because it's basically said to me, we're going to put this through because transgender people do not deserve the same human rights with healthcare that other people do. And if a transgender person was needing life-saving healthcare or anything, but let's say life-saving, you could say, oh, Drew used to be a girl, so I'm not going to help him. It's just, I can't do it. I don't get it. And I'm going to let him die. And I have a problem with that. I have a problem with that for myself and for other transgender people. So that's why I spoke out. And when I did, I got some great feedback and a lot of shares, a lot of video, people watching the video, and I have a great support system. That's wonderful. I also got some folks that reached out, and, you know, people will reach out and tell you their problems. And one of them said, you know, hey, we had a talk a long time ago, and, you know, my child still won't talk to me. My adult child won't talk to me because they just never could give me the space I needed to realize to you know, deal with the fact that they're trans. And I sat on that for a few days, and then I responded. And here's what I'm saying this to y'all. It's because what I responded was something like, it's not your child's job to help you through this. It's not the transgender person's job to help you understand this. It's your job. So let's just peel that back a little bit. As a parent, as a mother, and this is quoted places, this isn't mine, but I'm going to summarize it. It's your job to work on yourself, all humans, but as a mother and a parent, I think, is to work on yourself, heal yourself, face your demons, face your things, and Dr. V spoke to this very eloquently, so that you don't pass them on to your children or to the rest of your children's children, to the rest. They end with you. So do your work. So here's the thing. So what's happening right now, this isn't my job or Miliana's job or any other transgender person's job to convince people to love us or to get you to understand. It's actually, quite frankly, none of your business. It's none of my business that Dr. V is cisgender. It's none of my business that Daniel is. It's none of my business that you're gay. It's my business how you treat me, and I love how you treat me. That's why I love you. So, all of you. So it's no one's business that I'm transgender. I'm telling people that because I want them to go, oh, huh, I like Drew. He's transgender. Maybe I'll be nicer to Miliana. I have chills all over my whole body for that. Because you're going to let me be relatable and like me, but you may hurt her? Come on. This isn't about I understand it or I don't understand or I just don't, it's against my belief or I don't, well, I just vote this way because of fiscally. No. And here's where I'm standing up. And I sound fired up. Yeah, this is fired up for me, but I'm going to do this in a positive way moving forward, but I'm also fired up and I'm a bit pissed. Because our lives are being threatened, frankly. And guess what? It's not okay with me. So what's the work that can be done? If you're a trans person, this is something that I've spoke to at a college last year where I met actually Miliana, and Dr. V was also there. It was talking to these kids about trans positive stuff, like build your team. Your team isn't always who you want it to be. You want it to be your grandma. You want it to be your mom. But maybe they can't do it. Maybe they refuse to do it. Maybe they won't do it. But they should do it in your mind, right? But what if they don't? Build your team, your family, whatever you wanted that to be called. Build your team to help you survive this, get through it, thrive. Okay? There's so much more to that. For the people who are allies, who already are working on their things, hold space for people. That's what we want. Every human wants people to hold space for them. I was taught this lesson by somebody who was a dear friend of mine who died of ALS. While she was dying, while her body was giving up on her, I was transitioning. So I was starting my life when her life was ending. And we intersected and we had the most beautiful relationship. And she was the first person out that taught me holding space. She held space for me. And was like, Drew, if you need to go have the surgery, if you need to go do whatever you need to do, if I could have a surgery, if I could do anything to get this, to change my life, to change the ALS, I would do it in a heartbeat. You go do it and you go live. Okay? She held space for me while she was dying. That's what I would say to any of the allies. If you can hold space for people, what does that look like? That looks like whatever they say to you has nothing to do with you. Whatever I say, I mean, obviously, I mean, but if I'm talking about me and my being trans or whatever, it has nothing to do with Dr. V. She held space for me and heard me. And I wasn't worried about what I said, that it would affect her life. She held space for me. Thank you. And then for the folks who are saying, yeah, but I didn't get this and I still feel really uncomfortable with this and Drew makes me very uncomfortable, or whatever that is. Again, that means you have work to do. Does that mean I think I'm right and you're wrong? Yes, I do think I'm right and you're wrong. Frankly, I do. I think that you have work to do to find your humanity, to realize that I'm a human that just wants to live my life. And I'm a damn good human. So if you are seeking help, if you are seeking understanding, also seek your team. If you're in that area where you're like, I want to understand, but I'm going to say the wrong thing to my niece or whoever, seek another team of people that can hold space for you and help you. But don't ask the person who wants your love to listen to you, call them the wrong name and say, well, I'm working on it, or get them to help you, get your child to help you understand. You go seek it somewhere else and you can do it. You just have to find your heart. So Dr. V, thank you for saying that Miliana should be in this conversation, because she 100% should be in this conversation. Daniel, thank you for asking me to be in the conversation. Thank you for saying yes to Dr. V and Miliana, because their voices need to be heard. And I just want to say I feel like I could take on the world right now. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Drew, for being the commonality, the common denominator, and facilitating all this too.
For everybody watching, I know this is but the tip of the iceberg of the conversations that we can have, but I hope, I'm not here to change your mind. I'm not here to change your perception on life. I'm not here to put you even 90 degrees from where you are. I just want to make you think a little bit. Think about where you are. And again, look at yourself in the mirror. And if you're not comfortable with who you're looking at, what changes can you make? And this doesn't have to be just physical. It could be spiritual. It could be emotional. But just, if you're not comfortable, make the changes that you need so that you can be. And if listening to these stories that we just heard right now is going to help you a little bit, then I've done my job. I'm going to be honest, as a 49 gay man, Latino, Catholic, there's a lot of things that I'm still not comfortable with. This conversation was one that I because of who I am, I take on conversations that I'm not comfortable with so that I can learn and I can be a better person. Not necessarily for anybody else, but for myself. I want to know that when I lay in bed at night, I have done the best thing I can for the world. And although political correctness, misunderstandings, myths, lies, politics was keeping me away from having the conversation, I knew that because of all those, I had to jump over that barrier and see what was on the other side. And I am so glad that I took the leap. So I invite you, take the leap, have the conversations. The information to all these three great people are going to be in the description. So make sure you get in contact with them if you have any questions. If you have any questions to make yourself a better person, please do not approach them for anything mean-spirited or hateful. I'll find you. Miliana Singh, Drew Bensen, Dr. V, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your experience, your knowledge. You've inspired me to want to know more. Even as much as I thought I knew Drew, I was like, wow, I didn't know that. And yes, I'll marry you, Drew. I want to say that here. I don't know that there's anything else that I can add that they didn't say themselves. So if you didn't hear the message, rewind the video and watch it again. Share this with your friends. The more conservative thinking you are, I encourage you to watch this one more time. Thank you so much, guys, for being here. Thank you for your time. I know we went over the hour. I so appreciate that. I want to thank everybody watching. My name is Daniel G. Garza. This is Put It Together Conversations. And on behalf of Little Mexican Productions, I thank you for joining us. We will see you next time. Thank you. Thank you, folks.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Bye, ladies.